Okay, so hi everyone, good evening. Welcome to Chatham House and this Common Futures Conversation Roundtable on Youth Representatives. So my name is Katie McCann, I'm the consultant working on the project. If you aren't familiar with Common Futures already, although I know we've got some members here, which is fantastic, it's the flagship youth engagement project from Chatham House that seeks to connect young people from across Africa and Europe with each other and with policymakers. So today we'll be asking whether young youth representatives are the answer to meaningful engagement. Just go with some housekeeping to start with. So you can tweet about the event using hashtag #CHCommonFutures, and you can find us on Twitter and Instagram under the same name, so please do feel free to share as much as you'd want. This event is on the record, it's not under the Chatham House rule, and it is being recorded. So we want to start by giving our thanks to both the Y20 and Will and Maurizio from the British Youth Council, who came to us separately with really fantastic ideas, and we were able to kind of merge them into the event today. So big shout out to them because it wouldn't happen without them. So today we'll cover the role of youth representatives, how young people are received in politics, the lack of UK youth representatives to the UN, and the challenges of the current model. So it's an open forum, so while we do have some speakers who we've asked in advance to share from their personal experiences, we want to hear from everyone, whether you're in the room or whether you're online. So I would just ask you to introduce yourself before you speak, but please feel free to share as much as you would like. I will begin by turning to Safia Sangster. I'm just hoping you could introduce yourself and speak about your experience with the Y7.
Yeah, thank you, Katie, and thank you so much for inviting me here. It's amazing to be with so many young people in the room and virtually. I'm Safia. I am a Common Futures Conversations member, but I'm also this year the head delegate to the Y7, which is the official engagement group to the G7. I probably got interested in youth politics or politics in general at university, but I would say that CFC played a huge role in kind of my interest and my changing my perspective on politics, because we do take these complex policy issues and then you really get the opportunity to have them challenged and tested by such a diverse group of people who have different experiences, live in different contexts, are working in really different scenarios to your own experience, and I think that makes the best policy making personally. I also think youth politics is really important because young people are often associated with innovation and kind of a radical approach to policy making, and I mean that in a really positive sense of the word. I think if we're going to tackle these systemic issues and we're going to create real change from the ground up and really inclusively broaden our perspective on policy issues and global challenges, we need that sense kind of radical approach. So this year, I engaged in the Y7 process, which was really interesting. We kind of undertook a threefold process, I guess, which started with youth engagement in the UK and consulting with a wide range of young people's voices. I would say, one of the main things I took away is that, no young person has the same experience, and you really need to engage in different ways and with as many people as you can in order to bring together that kind of broad picture of priorities. Then the second phase was engaging with the other Y7 delegates from the G7 countries, and then also guest countries. So Ukraine, Senegal, and South Africa joined us this year. And so that was the process of negotiating and really pushing those policy priorities. And that was online and then in person in a summit in Berlin. And then the biggest chunk of work and really the most important part of the process is then that post-summit advocacy. So you've got a comprehensive set of recommendations, and I'm sure this is an experience that lots of us have faced in this room. Kind of, we know what we're passionate about and we have got these priorities, but how do you make people listen? So engaging with policymakers, we met with some policymakers in the UK government, we went to conferences, we wrote guest blogs and articles, any way we can get that message out and work with people to support our agenda. So overall, the process was amazing. If anyone wants more information about it or has questions, I'd be really happy to share my experience. And I guess the last thing that I would say, just kind of to get us thinking about today, is when I reflect on kind of the challenges of young people in policy making, or whether it's right that they are involved, one thing that I always come back to is that something that we seem to face is a homogenization of young people, and this kind of idea that, you know, having one young person at the table ticks a box, or all young people have the same experience. You know, I'm sure my own experience as a young woman of colour growing up in the UK is going to be vastly different to many other young people's experiences. And so how do we overcome that challenge of kind of token representation, or very kind of binary representation where we've got certain people around the table, but we're not taking that really kind of inclusive or kind of diverse perspective into account when we're struggling to kind of approach some thorny policy issues.
That's really interesting. I think that's stuff that we're going to go back to a few times in this session. I just bring in Mohammad, Karim from the Y20. I was just wondering what it's been like for you. What are the issues that you see in the youth engagement space?
Absolutely. Firstly, esteemed guests and friends who are tuning in online, thank you very, very much for being at this event. I was just recalling that last time I was at Chatham House was on the 6th of July, the day before Boris Johnson resigned. And with the way things are going at the moment, it might be an omen that every time I come to Chatham House, someone ends up resigning at number 10. But before I begin, I'd like to thank two sets of people. Firstly, Chatham House, in particular, Ben, Katie and Fiona, for all of the effort that you've put in setting up this event. You know, it means a huge amount to us to give us this platform to talk about such an important issue. And secondly, I'd like to thank my Y20 delegates delegation, the UK delegation. So we've got Sean and Michaela here, and Larry, who is tuning in online. My name is Mohammad Karim, the UK's head delegate to the Y20 this year. And it is my honour to speak at this event because I feel that this event is of the utmost importance. An event where hopefully we'll be discussing how young people can amplify the issues that they care about onto the national and the international stage. But also an event where we can be discussing how the brightest talents from our communities can get the skills that they need in order to make a positive change in their society. And I feel that the timing for this event is really apt because youth disengagement in politics is ever growing. And whilst young people don't really want to get involved in politics, I feel that a lot of political issues often have a disproportionate impact on them. Just look at the cost of living crisis or climate change, or even unemployment and the effects of Ukraine. Young people often bear the worst brunt of these crises. And prior to the Y20 summit, what we did was we held a number of focus groups with young people from across the country, trying to find out what their views were. And overwhelmingly, we found out that a number of young people are disengaged, disenfranchised, and disinterested in politics. And at the time, you know, I felt angry, but on reflection, I don't blame them, because whether it's the fact that they don't trust politicians, or it's the fact that they don't necessarily think politics will actually make a change, or just the fact that they can't find a political home, all of these are very, very valid reasons. But as part of the Y20, we kept on reminding them that politics is here to stay, whether you like it or not. Just because you don't take an interest in politics doesn't mean that politics won't take an interest in you. And you know, we talked about the number of issues that affect them on a day-to-day basis and how politics can be an effective tool for change. We told them that the best way to amplify your voices is not by taking a back seat, but by actively being involved, becoming engaged, raising your voice where it matters, and hopefully making some sort of change. Because as the old adage goes, if you don't have a seat around the table, you'll be on the menu. Meaning, if you don't raise your voice in places of influence, then you'll have other people writing your destiny for you. And I think that is one of the biggest problems that young people had, the fact that their destiny was out of their control. And in a way, that's what the Y20 allowed us to do, to an extent. Young people claiming back their destiny and driving the direction that we wanted things to go in. The Y20 is the G20's official youth engagement group, and what happens is our main role is to ensure that the G20 leaders communique actively takes into account the views of young people from within our nations. And each year, after a rigorous application process, 4 delegates from each of the G20 nations are selected to represent the views of young people from their country. This year, myself, Sean O'Dilly, Michaela Chan and Hilary Kirkpatrick Lorente were selected from the UK, and we flew off to Indonesia, Jakarta and Bandung to be precise. And the 4 key areas that we focused on were firstly youth unemployment, secondly digital transformation, thirdly sustainable and livable planet, and finally diversity and inclusion. I guess overall the experience was amazing. The warmth, hospitality and culture of Indonesia was really, really good. But more importantly, it taught us a lot about how policy is made and the real challenges that are commonly shared amongst G20 nations regarding the issues that young people face around the globe. We also had personal agendas that we wanted to push, in that we've all been involved in certain political events before, and we wanted to kind of push what we felt passionately about. So for Sean, that was trying to get rid of unpaid internships. For Hilary, she wanted to ensure that a G20 digital charter was created to protect young people online. Michaela wanted to ensure that the intergenerational right to a healthy, sustainable and clean environment was put within national constitutions. And I wanted to make sure that soft skills education, in particular verbal communication training, was enshrined as part of national curricula by 2025 to ensure that young people from disadvantaged backgrounds have the skills that they need in order to thrive. And following the summit, we were lobbying senior journalists, members of the civil service and politicians. We had the wonderful opportunity of going to present our communique at Downing Street, engaging with Jonathan Black, who is the G20 Sherpa, and also meeting with various journalists too. And in addition, Michaela attended the UN Y20 event, where together they put forward 9 policy recommendations to governments for more inclusive, sustainable and meaningful youth engagement. I think I would end by saying that for far too long, the views of young people have been excluded from decision-making tables. And this is gravely unfortunate, because young people often have the experience, the energy, and the enthusiasm to remedy some of the most pressing issues around the globe today. And the longer they continue to be excluded, the more frustrated they'll get, but the lack of diversity will have when it comes to solving these decisions. The Y20 was just a first step to us actually trying to get more meaningful youth representation. But I'd argue that the UK delegation's biggest aim is not yet achieved, because that is creating more youth representatives, but also as part of that, getting more young people involved in politics. Today's event is short, it's only an hour, but who knows? It could be the blueprint for greater youth involvement, and even could be the start or a source of inspiration for the next UK youth representative, or even a future politician of the UK. Thank you.
That was excellent. Thank you so much. I think we'll open it out to the room now if we can. I think something that Safia, you were saying, you were touching as well on disengagement and tokenism, is about maybe the nature of youth representatives. So kind of wondering if we could start it off, are youth representatives another form of youth washing? Anyone has any thoughts they would like to? Maurizio?
I'll jump in. My name is Maurizio. I represent the British Youth Council. Awomoyi. I'm the UK's Young Ambassador to the European Youth Forum. The reason I want to jump in on this is because the British Youth Council, as their top international priority this year, they've launched a campaign on re-establishing a UN Youth Delegate. It's quite a unique campaign in that we're trying to empower young people, and we're trying to do it at the international level. It's an area that, as you mentioned, often gets forgotten. It's an area that young people don't know about, and that's why I'm very thankful for Chatham House hosting this event. What I would say about this is that UN youth delegates, just having them is not enough. Just having youth representatives on their own, just there, is not enough. That is a form of just ticking the box. Safia, you mentioned it earlier that there's no point to it. There's no point if we're just there to tick a box. We need to have a meaningful say. And that's why in our campaign, we're really trying to reach out to other UN youth delegates, as we have done, to truly learn how different programs work, to understand how we can create a sustainable UN youth delegate program. Because that's what it's all about. It's about creating a real, meaningful avenue for youth participation and for young people to truly get involved in the process. I'll speak about it a bit later on, but there's a lot I can talk about the UN Youth Delegate. It's a serious campaign, and it's a campaign that's really necessary at this moment. You see the war in Ukraine, you see climate change. I could go on and on. There's so many issues. We need UN Youth Delegates. We need more youth representatives. We need those people there challenging our politicians so we can actually get our messaging across. So that's what I'd like to add.
It'd be great to get anyone's thoughts around the table on this. Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is McCann and I'm coming from the Future Leaders Network, and I've worked with Mohammad and Safia and the rest of the Y7 and Y20 delegation. And actually we've met before because we were on a UN Youth Forum last year.
On disarmament.
Last summer. And I remember being accepted into that and being, it was actually run by the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs, which is right now very topical, obviously. And I remember, signing up to it and getting accepted and being like, oh, wow, okay, so the UN is doing some work to really engage with youth representatives in this quite niche field as well, disarmament affairs. But I don't know what your views are on it, but it was a 3-week program, very intense. And we came out with policy recommendations and we had a virtual event. But then I came out of it thinking it was kind of like a tick box exercise, because I was like, what can we achieve in 3 weeks? And mind you, we were doing this alongside our studies or day jobs or whatnot. And after the sort of declaration, policy recommendations, I don't get any updates about it. I feel like we kind of had to reach out. I did feel like it was tick box exercise, that we can't make a substantial change in just 3 weeks. And then no follow-up. So I don't know what your thoughts are, but yeah.
Exactly the same. If I could just jump in and say
Yeah,
that.
of course, yeah.
It was the Seoul Youth Declaration.
Yes,
That's
yeah.
what it was.
Yeah.
And I think we only got one email telling us, oh, it was presented at the UN
Yeah.
General Assembly. What's the point in that
Yeah.
if we're not there to speak on it? It's exactly, I share the same sentiments.
Yeah, it was a 3-week program, not a long-term process. So yeah, I think these kind of programs exist in all kind of big institutions, and really it should be established more long-term and an actual process rather than an event.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I just want to go back to what you said earlier, that there's only four of you on the team there, and that's obviously a very small amount of people. So that in the future leads to longer term problems once people like us end up leaving university, was they at 21, 22, they've done an undergraduate and a master's. They don't have the experience in the international realm or in policy making, because the number of people involved in things like that is so little. So in the future, when people actually want to go into policy making or want to go into international affairs, they're really restricted in what they can do because they don't have the experience in it. And from a countrywide point of view, then you don't have trained diplomats, you don't have people skilled in this area. So that's a major problem that we kind of need to address, but how do we do that? That's the big problem.
I mean, that's a great question. Does anyone have any thoughts on how we do that? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tom from the European Youth Forum, and we are an organisation that are made up of 100 different youth organisations from across Europe, and I think this model of organised youth is a way of addressing the challenge of youth washing, because accountability is a key part of it. Youth representatives don't participate in youth washing if they're held to account by the people they're there to represent. But we can kind of participate in youth washing if the people we're engaging with, the decision makers and policy makers that we're working with, are engaging in youth washing, and we're enabling them to do that, and not hard enough and not calling them out. So the European Youth Forum, we have 100 core members. They represent a further 6,000 youth organisations from across Europe. We have a pretty strong, robust internal democracy. We have 2 big general assemblies each year, and these are the 2 largest sort of youth democracy events on earth. And they bring together a whole range of different perspectives. We have a really diverse membership. We have a member from at least from all the European countries, and then from a number of different thematic areas. So the European Students' Union, for example, is one member, World Scouting, so on and so forth. But because we have these internal democratic processes, we're able to create a space where everyone can voice their opinion, and each of the representatives has a mandate to compromise and to discuss. And as a result of that, we reach positions which are ambitious and bold, but also inclusive of everyone in the room, which is not necessarily the case if you don't have such a sort of robust internal democracy, and then people end up getting excluded, some voices end up getting marginalised, and we end up becoming part of the problem. So I think accountability is a key part of preventing youth washing, and also working with youth organisations who have diverse memberships and are able to bring a whole range of voices to the table.
Just kind of add to that really interesting point. My name's Afzal, I'm from the Commonwealth Youth Council, which is the world's largest youth organisation, but maybe would have the least heard about as well, which is a concern and alarm. But so my kind of background was I ran to be one of the vice chairmen of the Commonwealth Youth Council, and now Commonwealth Youth Leader, part of the executive committee. And as the world's largest youth organisation, we technically represent every young person in the Commonwealth. And that's a very big agenda and a very big mission. But one of the problems we identified was we can be the cause of our own problems sometimes, or we can exclude young people. Like you mentioned about there's only 4, was it Y7 or Y20 delegates?
Both.
And, you know, with the Commonwealth Youth Council, we're not looking at top down, we're looking at down up. So it's about going out to the communities, going out to young people. Respectfully, people like in our positions are interested in politics, are interested in civic engagement. So we apply, we seek out these positions. But the hidden and quiet voices that aren't heard really should be our target audience. So going out into the communities. So I was, working with Cameroon and the Cameroon youth organisations. And one of the criticisms that came about with Commonwealth Youth Council was the membership is organisations. So already formed organisations, already engaged organisations, young people. What about those who don't find themselves in an organisation? What about those who don't find themselves fitting in a certain kind of environment or scenario? What are we doing to reach out to those young people who aren't members of any organisation? So that is a common thing with Commonwealth Youth Council, with even the British Youth Council, the European Youth Forum, is we're too organised sometimes and too formal. And just kind of speaking with a different hat on, I'm also a graduate of the Patchwork Foundation, which is a fantastic organisation. If you've not heard about it, honestly, check it out. And with the Patchwork Foundation, I was really honoured to be accepted to go into the International Visitors Leadership Programme in America. So in July, went on a 2-week visit to the States. And the last session we had was with Racine County Council, and I was honoured to chair that session, where we met with Racine County Council, and they have a very unique model in youth engagement. We talk about, being tick box exercises, for example, and the motto I stood on with the Commonwealth Youth Council was bringing young people to the decision-making table. And what Racine County Council does is literally bring young people to the decision-making table by them not simply being a temporary measure to hear their voice, but they sit through the whole democratic process in the county council chamber, in the bylaw and law-making, decision-making and everything. Their voices are heard, they sit in the chamber as elected officials, and they then feed in the voices of almost every young person in Racine County. So that's a separate point, but a point we should all maybe think about is the formalisation as well of young people in the decision-making process, because we don't have that really in the United Kingdom at the moment.
That's really interesting. You want to say?
Yeah, hello. I'm Mia Tara. I work at a social mobility charity. I'm also a graduate from the Patchwork Masterclass programme. I think from all the really interesting comments I've heard so far, I think an underlying theme seems to be young people being put into spaces or structures of power that weren't designed for them in the first place. If you put someone into a power structure that wasn't designed with them in mind, you're not going to get the best out of that person, be that a young person, someone from a marginalised group, anyone. They're not going to thrive in that environment. And I think a big structural change that could really benefit both organisations in the UK and internationally is making sure that the support and structures are there for young people who, when they get into these positions of power, are able to make the biggest impact and gain the most from them. Because it's all well and good having tokenistic representation by having young people in those areas, but if you put someone into a structure that's not made for them, you're not going to get the best from them. So you need to make a wider systemic change here of changing the power structures rather than just adding young people into them.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah, just to kind of follow up on both points. Hi, I'm Inigo. I'm a member of the Common Future Conversations Forum. I think what's important in both points that were made there is going from local to international kind of structures, because we often speak of, we need to change the idea of what a UN youth delegate represents. Why don't we start at the local level? Why don't we start making youth actually have an impact at the local level and then grow that towards more international organizations? Because it's very easy to speak on a grander scale, and it's very hard to see kind of the long-term impact of that in the grander scale. But if we bring it down, go to local communities and make those youth representatives, as in that example, kind of actually have a voice in that and see the tangible impact they're making, we're going to grow from the ground up.
It's really interesting you talk about the kind of different levels to youth representation, because I will just now go to William Awomoyi from the British Youth Council, who's bringing a campaign for UK youth reps to the United Nations, so on the total opposite of the local scale. Can you set the scene a bit for us? Why is this something that you want to do? Why is it important?
Yeah, so I was actually just intending just to go back to the local point, actually. But hi, my name is William Awomoyi. I'm the UK Young Ambassador to the Commonwealth. I'm a second-year politics student at Cambridge University, and I'm also a 2022 Diana Award winner. But I want to express my gratitude to, obviously, Katie, Ben, and Fiona, and members of the Common Futures Conversations programme. And what I intend for is a proper conversation about how young people can be more engaged. And I actually wanted to talk about my initial experience as a youth representative. So I haven't just been the UK Young Ambassador to the Commonwealth. I've actually been in the youth representation field for about 5 years. I started half a decade ago as the first young mayor of Croydon. And that was on a mandate of reducing knife crime in a borough of around 100,000 people. Now, we actually did that in just 10 months. So this is the beauty of youth representation. We actually were able to make an actual change in just 10 months. I don't just want to talk about the grander, how this year I flew to Rwanda. I want to talk about how do we actually create some change. So according to official police stats, by comparing 2019 to 2017, there has been a 15.6% decrease in knife crime in Croydon. In comparison between those years, there was a 7.1% increase in the London average. So you can see that as the London average was increasing, we were decreasing crime in Croydon by double the amount. Now, that is a major change. That shows that there was some sort of unique phenomenon going on in Croydon at that time that other boroughs in London simply weren't experiencing. And we have to remember, in 2017, Croydon was the most dangerous borough in London for knife crime offences. And when calculating the crime rate per 1,000 of residents, the rate of offences in the borough has fallen from 1.7 in 2017 to 1.4 in 2018, where it has remained the same in 2019, against a backdrop of the London average, which has seen an increase from 1.4 in 2017 to 1.7 in 2018, where it remained the same. So as the London average was increasing for crime, Croydon's average was actually decreasing. So there's actually been some level of material change. Now, how do we turn it around? Well, the practical things were establishing an independent advisory group for young people with the police to scrutinise the police. We realised that there was a disconnect between young people and the police. Young people don't really get the opportunity to talk to the police, to engage with the police. So my job was to give young people the power to express themselves in a different scenario. And that was create that youth independent advisory group so young people could have that ability to scrutinise the police and have that power to actually create recommendations for themselves with the police. Not only did we do that, but we created a Young Mayor's Fund. So we had young people leading projects and actually creating projects that they wouldn't necessarily be able to do themselves. So we funded a record label, archery classes, we funded safe spaces. There were so many different aspects of this, and the whole point is to give young people the power. When you're a youth representative, the main thing is not to consolidate the power for yourself, actually is to actually decentralize that and give other young people the opportunity to actually engage and express themselves, which is what we're doing right now with BYC, where we're actually recruiting more international associates. We realized that, we are a small team. There's only about, 3 of us now, and we're trying to actually recruit. we're saying, let's get more young people in the table and talking about these issues. It's not just enough for me to come here and say, I'm the ambassador to the UK. It's nice, but like, you know what I mean? Like, we actually need to get young people in the room and actually discussing these topics. But the real substance of this is actually that the real substance of youth representation is allowing young people to be the ones who have the power in the room. Not just telling them you need to express yourself, but actually giving them the power to express themselves. And that was my role. And I want to talk about just, because I know obviously we're in a room of many young people who are probably going to go on to be, you know, very good youth representatives. Let's talk about the positives in that regard, because ironically, actually, when you give more power to young people, you actually are in a position of more power being a youth representative to young people, because actually it consolidates your own power and makes it a positive sum game. Like, this is because if the influence of young people is stronger, then your influence as the youth representative of young people also becomes stronger, because power is relative. So you actually become stronger in that position, and you become more influential if we want to put it in that perspective. So there's literally benefits for all sides of the equation. And that's why it's so important to get young people's voice on the matter. So yeah, like, I was just going to currently focus on the UNYD campaign. So what is that about? We realised, again, I'm in a position where I'm a youth representative now of obviously internationally. And we recognise that we want more young people on the table, you know, discussing important issues. So we said to ourselves, how about we create a space to rebuild that programme? You know, young people are not represented internationally well enough, we believe, and we want young people to have that ability to represent themselves at the United Nations. This is not for me, it doesn't have anything to do with the Commonwealth. This is just completely something that we believe is necessary and needs to be done. Because we realise that other countries who have less of a youth population still have UNYDs. So if we look at Ireland, for example, the percentage of their young people, if we're taking it from young people who are 25 and under, there's about 26% of young people. So young people make up about 26% of the population, and they have a UNYD. If we look at Slovenia, they make up around 12% of the population, and they have a UNYD. If you look at the UK, for example, we have 35% population, and we don't have a United Nations youth delegate. That's absolutely terrible. And you don't just have to take my word for it. You can take the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 16.7, which talks about, you know, making sure there's like responsive and inclusive participation for young people, and not just young people, all people in institutions. You can look at the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2250 on youth, peace and justice, which talks about actually making sure that young people are included in the decision-making process. You can look at Commonwealth Youth Declaration, section 1A16, where it talks about making sure that institutions have the ability and the capacity to actually support young people on the international scale. So you can see here that actually, it's not just me that's saying it. Young people all over the world need to be represented, but especially in the UK, and that's why we're doing this United Nations Youth Delegate Programme. And I'm going to move on very swiftly to Maurizio, who's been working on it alongside me, and he's been doing like a lot of work on that side.
So yeah, thank you for that background. It's, as I mentioned earlier, it's a really important campaign. It's something that is quite shocking, actually. It's quite shocking that we're even having to campaign on this. We should just have a UN youth delegate. We should have several UN youth delegates. You touched upon that there's 35% of the population that are considered young people. That's 24.2 million aged under 25. That is crazy to think about. That seriously is crazy to think about, that all those young people are not being represented at the UN. Sure, we have delegates to the Y7, to the Y20, to the European Youth Forum, to the Commonwealth Youth Council, naming a lot of different organizations here, but the UN is something completely different. And quite frankly, we're not leading. The UK is not leading on this. 36 out of the 46 Council of Europe member states, of which the UK is a member of, have UN youth delegates. Only 10 don't. That's about 76% that do. Similar statistics can be seen amongst G7 nations. 71% of those nations have UN youth delegates. For the G20, 53%. I know that's a lower number, but still above the majority. 53 have UN youth delegates. 53%, sorry, have UN youth delegates. It's just shocking. And you mentioned that I've been working on this issue. Well, during the summer, I've gone on to several different calls, meetings, trying to meet with UN youth delegates, both current and former. partly to understand their roles, understand how different programs work, understand their structures, understand their strengths and weaknesses. There are many. And the reason for this is not just to have a nice little chat with someone and understand, what they do and say, oh, wow, that's cool. It's truly to get best practice advice and understand how those programs are good and bad. So hopefully we can implement a program that works, a program that is sustainable, a program that sees democratic accountability, as you mentioned earlier. These are all key themes that we want to do with this campaign. We want to implement a program that works, a program that sees UN youth delegates elected and accountable to young people across the UK. And especially now, this is very important. You mentioned earlier that we're at an all-time low in terms of trust in government. Well, recent polling backs that up. Less than 1 in 5 young people have faith in the government. Do I need to say more? No, that says it all. It's about representation. It's about making sure that young people have a meaningful way to participate, to influence policy, and to have their voices heard. And so, obviously, we're expanding our team to, really fight for this campaign, because it's a campaign that's worth fighting for, and it's a campaign that we need as much energy as possible. So, if anyone here is interested in getting involved in that, I would encourage you, come speak to us after, and we can point you to the application. But it's an exciting campaign, and it's a necessary campaign. And I forgot to mention this, but it's been 6 years since the UK last had UN youth delegates. 6 years. How much has happened in 6 years? Again, I'm not going to touch upon all the different changes that have happened, all the different prime ministers and everything, but 6 years. It's crazy.
That's really interesting, to think about, you're saying about trust and, the length of time that it's been. I know, Tom, you've been quite involved in that campaign. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
I can add some from a youth forum point of view, less from the UN youth delegate side, but I think it's to maybe pick up on the point about ticking the boxes that I think someone made earlier on, and making sure this is meaningful. It's really important that youth representatives are not just there to kind of show the face and to give a nice social media post to whoever you're talking to afterwards, but to lead to policy change. And I think, as someone else mentioned earlier on, there are challenges with the system. It's not designed to engage with young people, and we need change in how policy is developed so that it includes young people in a much more central way. One of the things we're calling for at the European Youth Forum is an EU youth test. We started the campaign at the beginning of the year, and it's picked up a lot of momentum really quickly. And I think that there will be an EU youth test in the next few years, and this will change the way that EU legislation is written. The youth test involves 3 elements. The first is consultation with young people. It'd be a legal requirement for young people to be consulted on a new piece of policy that is being developed. The second is an impact assessment. So the policy would be assessed from the perspective of, is this going to have an impact on young people or future generations? And then the last step is mitigation measures, which will be put in place to offset any negative impact that is likely to occur from that policy on young people. And this is something which has started in a number of different countries. Austria have a youth check, which follows this similar kind of approach, and it's worked really well there. France has a similar thing. This would be the first of its kind on an EU level, but it would mean structural, permanent engagement across all policies, not just those which are typically seen as the ones which touch on young people's concerns the most. It's not just about education or employment, but this is about all policy areas and bringing them into the heart of European democracy. And this is something which can be applied nationally. It could happen in the UK and also locally. It's a quite widely applicable model, but it's designed to address that issue of bringing young people into the conversation, but leaving them there and not taking them into the development or implementation of what's written down in policy as it's developed.
It's really interesting. I don't know if anyone has any immediate reflections.
Hi, I'm William's sister. I'm his support. And I just had some questions that I wanted to pose to you youth representatives. I dabbled in it a little bit when I was younger. Saying like I'm really old. I just wanted to ask about, how are youth representatives ensuring that they're not just representing themselves and they're representing the people that they say they are? And I know that I've heard like consultations, do you guys have targets to your consultations? And is it something where you're like, oh, in my local area, or is it like a Survey Monkey? Or is it like people, do you have like, okay, if you're from a rural coastal area in Scotland, we need this many people, and we need people from, you know, from the southeast of London, of England, and like some people from Northern Ireland, like when you have these consultations, what are the requirements for them to make sure that you're actually adequately representing young people? Or do you kind of just have like, oh, 100 people did this consultation? Like, how does it work? I'm just kind of curious.
I don't know if anyone from the Y20 wants to answer.
Sorry, can I answer that? Sorry, I'm talking. The Future Leaders Network actually hosted the U7 last year because the G7 was under the UK's presidency. So it came to a British-based youth organisation. And actually that was something that we really wanted to work on as well. So alongside consultations, we also had what we called a youth forum, and it was made up of youth from all four corners of the UK. We ensured that it was all four corners of the UK, and not just, you know, England or even London based. And what these youth forum individuals did was actually support the 4 Y7 delegates last year in the policy making. So it wasn't just the 4 Y7 delegates who were selected, but actually they had a team of youth forum representatives who were from different backgrounds. So we had someone from a coastal background, and I think they ran a organisation on doing beach clean. So that was something they were really passionate about. I think they were from Cornwall. We also had like someone who was from a farming community in Wales. So making sure that it wasn't the sort of typical, very highly university educated people who are from London kind of background. So we made sure that all the regions, all the different backgrounds were represented. And so that's something we did try and work on. It's not a perfect system, but we recognise that it definitely had to be addressed. So that's one way the Future Leaders Network and the Y7 last year tried to do it.
I would maybe add that, while exactly that, it's amazing what a lot of these organisations work with, considering the resources they have. And the issue is that youth work is rarely funded. You know, most of us do this in our kind of voluntary spare time. We don't have the financial resources to exactly set, I think, those targets that we want to set, to use the technology that we would like to be able to use to reach those numbers. So I think that's something I certainly learned during the process, is while you can be really ambitious about the targets or the range of people that you would like to reach, there is a huge disparity in contrast to other formal policy making spaces, and it kind of reinforces that idea of young people's voices being less valued, or young people's you know, I feel like I almost take issue with this word participation, because what does that even mean? That we need that decision-making element, and in order to get to that decision-making element, you need the funding and you need the resources, and at the moment across the landscape it's not there.
Yeah. No, that's actually a really good question. I think I think no, we see that a lot, like in a lot of youth spaces. How do we actually ensure? Because I think your question is basically, to what extent are we actually, is there actually an impact to these consultations, like in plain English? And I think that's a good question, because we need to start making youth engagement more meaningful, which is actually the whole point of this conversation. In regards to BYC is a really, really good charity. It has like the NHS Youth Forum, it has the Bank of England Youth Forum, it has the Youth Careers Advisory Group, it also has the UKYA programme, the UK Youth Parliament programme, and then every year there's like an annual council meeting where we have to basically report what we've done. Trustees have to report what they've done. We have youth trustees as well, and everybody kind of has to just report what they've done. And there's this level of, you know, you actually have to discuss what you do. You're not just allowed to just get away with doing nothing. Like, you kind of have to discuss what you've done throughout the year, and there's a level of transparency which I think is really important, and that's what BYC has. Our last one was last month, and it happens every year, so it'll happen again next year. And we gave a report about our role as UK young ambassadors, But as well as that, I think you raised like a good question in regards to like, I think that the whole like social contract is a bit unconventional when it comes to youth representation. Like a conventional social contract is when people come together and then they organise and they choose a representative and that person is their representative. It's a bit different with youth politics. It feels like people do come together, they decide that they need a representative, but the representative is kind of co-opted and chosen by the institution that you're looking for help with. And then that kind of creates a bit of an issue, because then like to what degree is that representative accountable? And I think that's what Tom was talking about. I think it's important to try and create some sort of accountability mechanism within those institutions to ensure that actually the representative does represent the greater amount of people, because we can say we are UK young ambassadors and we represent 24 million people, but I haven't actually seen 24 million people in front of me. So it's like you kind of have to like force yourself to be accountable, and that's a good question. We do need more accountability sort of mechanisms, making sure that we can actually create change which is good and positive for the people that we represent.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. My name is Jody and I'm a Y20 delegate for Canada this year on the Sustainable Livable Planet track, so I negotiated alongside Michaela. On accountability and like I think it also matters like the time scale that we operate in. For Y20 delegations and Y7 as well, the turnover rate is annual, right? So for Y20, we started in February and the summit happened in July, and the presidency gets handed over in December and a new batch of delegates come in. And what we're lacking is these institutional memories from one delegation to the next, vertically speaking, to pass that baton on to make sure we keep the conversation going. But because of this short time scale, we also don't have enough time to do the consultations, to set the quotas, to make sure that we also have enough time to advocate afterwards and for implementation. So that's the kind of the vertical institutional memory, I would say, but also the horizontal memory. You named all these amazing youth organizations, delegations. How much are we talking to each other, right? Between Y7 and Y20, we try to talk, but what about Y20, the Commonwealth? At the end of the day, it's still the G20 countries that have huge implications on the rest of the world. But how much, like, we couldn't really consult with youth members outside the G20 forum, even though the action and the inactions of the G20 have huge implications on global youth. So I mean, these are all big questions to reckon with, but I think the turnover rate and creating those institutional memories is also really important.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on to what's been said so far, there were a number of times that the Y20 delegates we felt like frauds. How are we meant to, the four of us, represent all of the youth from across the UK? And in answer to the question over there, I think there were two issues which we consistently faced. Firstly, a lot of the people we were put in touch with who were representing the youth were from formal organisations or formal structures. And those are the kinds of people who are likely to put themselves forward and volunteer. And they're all likely to be of a similar mould, people who are ambitious or seek out opportunities. But how representative is that actually of youth in the UK? And the second challenge we faced is, even when we tried to devise certain quotas, even if you try and pick one or two people from each area across the country, they're not going to be representative of that area. Because one thing that we realised is that there are so many different factors that go into forming young people. Your upbringing, your education, the people around you, the level of support you get from social structures, that even if you pick two members from Darlington, for example, they're going to have vastly different experiences. So there's got to be a sense of, I guess, realism that you're not truly going to be representative of every single young person across the country, and you can't do that by quotas alone, but you kind of have to be a bit pragmatic about how representative you are in that sense, because the young youth voice, even within certain localized areas, is going to be really diverse anyway.
That's really interesting. Hugh?
It's really interesting discussion. I'm Hugo. I work at Imperial. I'm a lot on disruptive and emerging technology with government regulation companies. I do wonder, though, if we're looking at the wrong areas for youth representation. Like, it's great in the political sphere, great in supranational organizations, but a lot of the impact in the world right now is technology and corporations and companies. And I see on a day-to-day basis how fast technology is progressing. It's outpacing government by miles. You can put policy in place towards government, you can get them to try and implement it. They won't be able to do it. They don't have the technical literacy to do it. They don't have the capability. They don't have the oversight. I worry that you're putting so much emphasis and effort into organizations that I don't know who have a huge amount of power in the future. I genuinely think things are up for grabs. Way technology is progressing, I also think technology could be a great motivator for youth involvement. I think there's some really interesting technology around decentralized systems and how that can empower communities to make their own decision making. I think there's also opportunities for funding for that. But there's also going to be huge impacts of these technologies. I work a lot on the metaverse type of stuff, the amount of data, a data-rich environment that creates, what that can mean for propaganda, what that can mean for precise targeting of individuals based on their groupings, on how they act and what they do. That's really scary stuff. AI, machine learning, nuclear policy, like these are high impact areas. It'd be great to get more youth representation in those areas, on even boards of corporations, on the people that are creating the technology. This is what's going to impact people now, and is impacting people now, and will impact people in the future. What do you think?
I think that's a really interesting point. It's a point I hadn't really considered. I guess my initial reaction would be, I mean, you talked about nuclear policy, and that's obviously a relevant issue at the moment. We were at the UN Youth Forum for Disarmament. That you could argue is a great avenue to have the youth voice represented. But was it? I'm speaking candidly now. Was it? You know, I think, you know, there's an argument to be made that by formalizing structures, you can then perhaps also expand things. I think we need to get our foot in the door. You know, that's the first step. I'm not saying that we shouldn't focus on innovative ways of representing young people, but it comes back to our whole messaging about the UN Youth Delegate. We want it to be a sustainable program. We want it to be a democratically elected program. And we want it to really represent young people. And I know that's a slogan that a lot of people use, you know, youth participation, and that can lead to youth washing. We're really keen to make sure that we get an innovative, you know, set of, well, not innovative set of people, but just young people that are really passionate about a wide variety of issues, because that's the only way that, you know, people can be represented on those things. And so one of the things I love about the BYC structure is the democratic nature of it, the fact that every single year we have to report back, and throughout the year as well, but mainly every single year we have to report back, and we get grilled. We got grilled, you know, that should happen. We should be grilled on those things. So the fact that you're bringing up, you know, innovation, technology, the rapid rate at which it's growing, that sector, I think that's something that, you know, UN Youth Delegates, delegates to the Y20, to the European Youth Forum, they can all play a role into that.
They can. I think there is a role to be played, but I'll tell you, I work on regulation in this space. It's way slower than the technology is developing. And if you're trying to impact it at that level, I don't know how big an impact you will have necessarily. I'm just going to put that out there. Like, it's happening now. Like, I'm seeing how technology is developing. Let's say DeFi stuff, cryptocurrency, that type of thing. Governments don't know what they're doing. They really don't know what they're doing. AI, machine learning, they don't know what they're doing. Quantum computing, they do not have the expertise in the room. I know this because they're asking me. Like, that's not what should be happening. They can't get hold of the knowledge because they can't pay for it, essentially. Corporations are out competing them on price and recruitment. So I genuinely, I maybe this isn't the right space, but I think you need to look very carefully at how the technology is developing. Because there's applications, smart contracts. You could encode like things that limit people's access to environments, hard encode it, not like a legal thing, not like oh, maybe I can tell that policeman it's not quite, no, hard code, they would not be able to enter it. Your identification system could say specifically what you are, where you're from, all this sorts of stuff, say you can't have access. And that can be done now. Like that, those systems could be developed. That's not, the UN's not being able to tackle that even at a grown up, at the high senior adult level. They don't know what they're doing. So I don't know if impacting there will have the impact we think it will.
I take your point. I'm super interested in fintech, etc. as well. I wonder though, if you encourage so many young people to leave kind of the political sphere and go directly into the tech space, isn't that going to bridge the gap between those tech developments and creating the proper regulation? Like you're kind of forcing them into the avenue of directly going into that company and directly working in tech, and that bridge with the political system kind of is widening, and so we're going to continue with crazy amounts of technological and innovative development, and we're not going to have the proper people in government and in these international organizations who understand that development, who understand that innovation.
Does anyone have any kind of thoughts?
Hi, my name's Adiola, and I've been on like several international delegate opportunities, and last year I had the opportunity to be a delegate for the UN Women UK. And one thing that the UN Women did and other organisations that I've been part of is that they didn't just bring youth on the board and into these meetings, but they had like a support system. So for example, we had kind of like a welcoming event whereby we got to meet all the other youth delegates first, and then we kind of like had like a brochure of all the events that were there, which one we wanted to be part of, and then we kind of like selected, okay, we want to attend this event, and then the UN Women team then kind of like supported us with that, and then even after the event, they also followed up on us again and kind of like said, okay, this is the way you could then make impact in your own local community. So I think in terms of the UN having their youth delegate and the campaign that you guys are working on, one thing is definitely about not just getting the youth into the room, but supporting them before they get into the room, when they're in the room, and then also after they've left the room.
I think we're rapidly approaching time, unfortunately, although I could probably stay here all evening and talk more. I think for me, the main points I took away from today with that youth representation has to be more than a tick box exercise. It has to be long term and come with genuine power and responsibility. And it has to be genuinely representative and democratic as well. At all levels, local, international, the private sector as well, something we need to think about. And we need to look at the root causes of disengagement in the first place. I don't know, Mohammad, would you like to let everyone know where they can keep in touch with the Y20?
Absolutely. Best way to do that would probably be to get in touch with Michaela, Sean, or myself, and we can get the conversation going on that. AK as well from FLM.
Safia with the Y7?
Yeah, through the Future Leaders Network, we would be really happy to talk more about Y7 and Y20.
That's fantastic. William, where can people learn more about the UN campaign?
Yes, so if you check our Twitter and our Instagram, it's UKYA_live. Our LinkedIn is UK Young Ambassadors. You can also check the BYC website, where we do have a page and a section to do with the International Youth Programme as well. And I just want to say a big shout out to Tom. I know he's running for presidency for the European Youth Board, so good luck to him as well.
Fiona?
Yeah, and just kind of to bring that all together, I guess I've got a question from Hamza online, who asks, is there a platform or a site that brings all these opportunities together? Maybe that's a good question to end on. I don't personally know.
That's what we're trying to make. That is the whole point of the UN Youth Delegate. Just one last little thing about the UN Youth Delegate. Our vision for it, obviously it's still a work in progress right now. Well, obviously it's a long process. You want to make sure that we get multiple eyes on our idea and our vision for a UN Youth Delegate. But very broadly, we want it to connect youth representatives, and we also want to connect young people that feel left behind, because that's been a topic of this conversation. There's so many young people that are just disengaged with politics. They feel it doesn't work for them. And the idea behind this campaign is to truly tap into that, reach out, go into schools, not just do one event a year, not just do one event every 2 years, but truly reach out on an ongoing basis, on a regular basis, and tap into those communities to make sure they're represented.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Sorry, can I just add as well, really quickly? I'm Ishan, I'm a youth representative to a number of UN agencies and advising a number of member states. We have a Google spreadsheet that we've been using. We directly engage with Youth Envoy, with Secretary General on a regular basis. We've literally just created a spreadsheet on Google Sheets, and we can share it with all of you. It's just a centralized database. We're working right now on the establishment of the UN Youth Office. So just happy to share that with you. It's very informal. It's just a very informal way of young people to see what's going on in the UN sphere and provide opportunities for how you can meaningfully engage beyond just speaking at events, but actually influencing negotiations, writing resolutions even, and things like that.
That's really great. I might have to get that link from you afterwards. And do follow Common Futures on Twitter and Instagram. We do just share opportunities when we see them. So make sure to follow us. And feel free to share about the event, and also for people in the room, we have copies of the last issue of The World Today, which was a special Africa issue, and that's the Chatham House magazine. And we also have the Africa Programme's annual report from last year, which does mention Common Futures. So yeah, thank you all very much for coming and get home safe.
Thank you.